Symbols are important in speech communication. Without symbols, there would be no message. And without identifying the symbols used in an interaction, we won't be able to analyze the interaction well, nor find the meaning of the interaction. Most of the symbols we see are in written form, but here we will focus on the verbal and nonverbal symbols or messages that we produce. We don't just communicate by talking or by saying the words we want to say, but we also communicate by our nonverbal messages, which most of the time we're used to aid or complement our verbal messages. I will discuss in my lecture the key principles of verbal and nonverbal communication, as well as explore the types or forms of nonverbal communication and how voice and diction affect verbal communication. Let's look first at the key principles of verbal communication, or simply how language works. First is that language and culture reflect each other. Language is the extent of our experiences, and we can only communicate what we only experience. We learn that cultures survive and flourish through communication, and that communication reflects cultural history, values, and perspectives. Verbal communication has the power to change cultures by naming things in ways that alter understandings. A variation of tone or pitch or even stress of syllables may reflect a difference of cultures. An example of this is dialect. Although there are a lot of Tagalog speakers, that doesn't mean that they have the same culture. The Tagalog dialect in Batangas is different from the Tagalog dialect in Bulacan. And although there are similarities when it comes to culture, you may still distinguish their differences and the uniqueness, not just on their dialect, but also on their way of life. Another example of the use of language and communication in relation to culture is the use of these in social movements, which are intended to change cultural life and meanings. The second principle of verbal communication is that meanings of language are subjective, and how we communicate verbally to others affects the construction of meaning. We have to remember that verbal messages are arbitrary, or in other words, meanings of words change over time. As meanings change, words also change to accommodate new or old meanings. This nature is reflected on how we change the pronunciation of a word, or the manner of saying a particular word or phrase. We can also see this on how we invent new words or mix words to associate a meaning. The third principle of verbal communication is that language use is rule-guided. Communication rules are shared understandings of what communication means and what kinds of communication are appropriate in particular situations. In other words, we make verbal communication more natural, and how we say words or phrases are based on what our lips and tongue can do, and other rules that we make, such as grammar and syntax, so that our speech would be understood by others. And finally, the last principle of verbal communication is that punctuation shapes meaning. In writing, we use commas, periods, and semicolons to define where ideas stop and start and where pauses are needed. Similarly, in oral communication, punctuation defines beginnings and endings of interaction episodes. To punctuate communication, we define when interaction begins and who starts it. When we don't agree on punctuation, misunderstandings may arise. Voice is important not only for speech communication scholars, but for everyone. The sound we produce helps us to create words, emphasize a part of our speech, convey our emotions, and deliver our message and our culture. Sound is produced because of vibrations. If we touch our throat while speaking loudly, we can feel that our throat is vibrating. That part of the throat where sound is produced by vibrations is called the larynx or voice box. It is located at the upper end of the trachea, or also known as windpipe, which is a tube that connects the larynx to the lungs where air is stored. This means that you need air to produce a sound. Vibration is possible because of the vocal cords or vocal folds, which are two small muscles found within the larynx. When you breathe, The vocal folds are open to allow air to flow from your upper airway into your trachea and lungs. But when you want to speak, you close your vocal folds and begin to exhale, causing an increase in pressure that causes them to vibrate. The vibration of the vocal folds chops the airflow, causing a buzzing sound. This sound is then amplified and modified by vocal tract resonators such as the throat, mouth cavity, and nasal passages. Once the amplified sound waves reach your mouth, you then use your lips, teeth, and tongue to shape the sound into speech, or what we call articulation. Without these parts, or if one of these body parts were damaged, we won't be able to speak clearly, making communication difficult. That is why we need to take care of our body and voice. Now let's go to nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication is all aspects of communication other than the use of words. It includes not only gestures and body language, but also how we utter words such as inflection, pauses, tone, volume, and accent. Nonverbal communication also includes features of environments that affect interaction, personal objects such as jewelry and clothes, and physical appearance. But before we explore the forms of nonverbal communication that we use, let us look first at the principles of nonverbal communication. First is that nonverbal communication may supplement or replace verbal communication. They may repeat verbal messages or may highlight verbal communication. They can also be used to substitute verbal cues. Nonverbal behavior complements or adds to words or even contradict verbal message. Second is that nonverbal communication may regulate interaction. Taking turns in conversations usually are regulated nonverbally. Third is that nonverbal communication often establishes relationship level meanings. Nonverbal communication often acts as a relationship language that expresses the overall feeling of relationships. It can convey three dimensions of relationship level meaning: responsiveness, liking, and power. In face-to-face interactions, immediacy behaviors include smiling, making eye contact, head nodding, and attentive posture. Online, we may communicate responsiveness by using emoticons or by replying immediately to an instant message or to comments in a chat room. Synchronicity or harmony between people's postures and facial expressions may reflect how comfortable they are with each other. Nonverbal behaviors often are keen indicators of how positively or negatively we feel toward others. Smiles and friendly touching convey positive feelings, whereas frowns or belligerent postures express antagonism. The third dimension of relationship level meaning is power. We use nonverbal behaviors to assert dominance or to negotiate for status and influence. And finally, nonverbal communication reflects and expresses cultural values. Most of the behaviors that we communicate are not actually instinctive but are learned in the process of being socialized within a particular culture. Now let us explore the types of nonverbal communication that we use. First is kinesics. It refers to body position and body motions, including those of the face. Humans communicated by gesture long before they learned to communicate verbally. We use gestures to emphasize verbal language and also to express feelings. Next is haptics, or the sense of touch. Research shows that touching and being touched are essential to a healthy life. Touching also communicates power and status. Another type of nonverbal communication are physical appearances and the use of artifacts. Cultures vary in their idea and value of physical appearances. Western cultures highly value physical appearance and beauty, while Japanese people see themselves with crooked teeth as beautiful. But one thing is common among these cultures, and that is to craft our image by our hairstyles, makeup, dress, and personal objects. Another type of nonverbal communication are environmental factors, which are elements of settings that affect how we feel and act. For instance, we respond to architecture, colors, room design, temperature, sounds, smell, and lighting. Proxemics and personal space are also nonverbal messages that we communicate. Every culture has norms that prescribe how people should use space, or how people should be to one another, and how much space different people are entitled to have. How people arrange space reflects how close they are and whether they want interaction. Our perception of time, or kinemics, is also a type of nonverbal message that we use. The length of time we spend with different people reflects our interpersonal priorities. We also use paralanguage, or communication that is vocal but does not use words such as murmurs and gasps, the use of vocal qualities such as volume, pitch, and inflections and accents, pronunciations, and the complexity of sentences. Silence can also communicate powerful messages. We use silence to communicate different meanings. For instance, it can symbolize contentment when intimates are so comfortable that they don't need to talk. Silence can also communicate awkwardness. As you know, if you've ever had trouble keeping conversation going on a first date. In some cultures, including many Eastern ones, silence indicates respect and thoughtfulness. Kinesics, haptics, physical appearances and artifacts, environmental factors, proxemics, chronemics, paralanguage, and silence are nonverbal cues that we use when we interact with other people. The use of language and nonverbal cues, as well as the knowledge of how we produce sounds, are essential for speech communication scholars. Communication is not possible if we don't know how to express our thoughts. Our message won't be interpreted correctly if we could not associate the meanings with the right symbols. And most importantly, if we don't take good care of our voice and body, we won't be much effective in interacting with others. We have to remember that our goal is to be an effective communicator. And we can achieve that not just by studying and understanding how our voice and body work, but also by making our voice and body